Have you ever heard of a single battle that lasted for nearly a year? One that was fought on a piece of land smaller than a lot of cities, but would go down as one of the longest and bloodiest fights in all of human history. Well, that's the story of the Battle of Verdun.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at Germany's absolutely brutal plan to win the war. Then, we'll see their shocking first attack. We'll dive into what life was really like on the battlefield, how France managed to fight back, and finally, we'll unpack the devastating legacy of this battle.
All right, so how did this whole thing even start? To really get Verdun, you have to understand what was going on at the Western Front back in 1916.
At this point in World War I, things were, well, they were stuck. You had millions of soldiers hunkered down in these massive networks of trenches that stretched for hundreds and hundreds of miles. Anytime someone tried to attack, they were just met with machine guns and artillery. It led to insane numbers of casualties for almost zero ground gained. This is what you call a stalemate, and Germany desperately needed a new way to break it.
So, a German general, Erich von Falkenhayn, he came up with this really grim new strategy. His idea was to attack the city of Verdun. Now, Verdun wasn't just some random city. To France, it was this huge symbol of their national pride and their history. Falkenhayn knew the French would throw every last soldier they had to defend it. And that, right there, was his entire plan.
This quote says it all. The goal wasn't really to capture Verdun. Nope. The real plan was to turn it into a giant killing ground, a human meat grinder. The idea was to kill so many French soldiers that France would literally lose its will to fight and just be forced to give up.
There's actually a name for this kind of fighting. It's called a war of attrition. It's this awful, cold calculation where you don't measure victory by how much land you take, but by how many of the enemy you can kill. And Verdun, it was designed to be the ultimate war of attrition, just a giant machine built to chew up human lives.
So, with this cold-blooded strategy locked in, the Germans launched an attack with an intensity that, honestly, the world had never seen before.
On February 21, 1916, the battle kicked off with just a monstrous artillery bombardment. In only the first few hours, German cannons fired over 1 million shells at the French lines. People said the noise was so loud you could hear it over 100 miles away. It just completely pulverized the French defenses.
Underneath this storm of explosions, German soldiers moved in, and they moved fast. In just 5 days, they captured Fort Douaumont. This was the biggest and most important fortress defending Verdun. It was a massive psychological blow to the French, and it looked like Germany's plan for a quick, crushing victory was actually working.
But that quick victory, it never happened. Instead, the battle just dragged on and on for months, and the land around Verdun was turned into something straight out of a nightmare.
You have to understand, the constant shelling literally reshaped the earth. It flattened hills, turned forests into nothing but splintered stumps, and turned the ground into this endless sea of mud and craters. Just imagine trying to move, let alone fight, in that kind of environment.
Over the next 10 months, both sides fired more than 40 million artillery shells at each other. Artillery was by far the #1 killer at Verdun. Shells were just raining down all the time, day and night. Whether you lived or died was basically a lottery.
For the soldiers stuck in the trenches, life was hell. You've got the constant noise, you're living in deep, cold mud, surrounded by rats and disease. Getting any sleep was pretty much impossible. And all of that stress, it caused something they called shell shock. It was a severe psychological trauma that many soldiers never, ever recovered from.
Okay, so the French army was on the absolute brink of collapse. They had to dig deep and find a way to hold on. And their incredible resistance is what would end up turning the tide.
The French had this massive logistical problem. The Germans had successfully cut most of the train lines going into Verdun. That left them with just one single, narrow road to supply their entire army. I mean, without a steady stream of supplies and fresh soldiers, the city was going to fall. It was that simple.
So what did they do? They organized this unbelievable supply chain on that one road. It became known as the Voie Sacrée, which means the sacred way. Thousands of trucks drove in a continuous loop 24/7, bringing men and ammo to the front. And they were serious about it. If a truck broke down, it was instantly shoved into a ditch just to keep the line moving. That road became the literal lifeline for France.
Then, in July, the French got some major help. Their allies, the British, launched their own massive attack further north at the Battle of the Somme.
This was huge because it forced the Germans to pull precious troops and artillery away from Verdun to deal with this new threat. It finally gave the French defenders a little breathing room.
With the German attack losing steam, the French started to push back. And in October 1916, they pulled off this huge victory. They recaptured Fort Douaumont. This wasn't just a strategic win, it was a massive boost to morale. It was the moment that proved the German plan to break them had officially failed.
By the end of the year, the fighting finally began to die down. But the price of this 10-month struggle was just almost beyond imagination. The battle was officially over in December 1916, and after 10 months of the most brutal combat imaginable, the front line was almost exactly where it had been back in February. Neither side had gained any significant territory. The entire horrific battle had been for practically nothing.
And remember that German plan to bleed France white? Well, it backfired big time. France lost around 160,000 soldiers killed, but Germany lost almost as many, about 140,000. That meat grinder Falkenhayn built, it cut both ways.
And just to be clear, that's only the number of soldiers who were killed. When you add in the wounded and the missing, the total number of casualties on both sides was over 700,000 casualties. An entire generation of young men was just wiped out on those hills. Today, the battlefield is a memorial. There's a building there called the Douaumont Ossuary, and inside it are the mixed-up remains of 130,000 French and German soldiers who could never be identified. It's just a chilling reminder of the scale of the slaughter. Verdun has become a symbol of incredible human bravery for sure, but also of the total pointlessness of industrial warfare. It really makes you ask a tough question. After a battle where nothing was gained and so much was lost, what are the real lessons here about the cost of modern war?